Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to another mod with me. Today we are going to be trimming and edging my Tarot of the She. So this is actually one of my favorite decks to work with. I absolutely love working with this deck. I get so many powerful readings from this deck, but it has that shiffer cardstock. You know the stock I'm talking about. That super thick, super glossy, super sticky shiffer cardstock, which is so sad because these images are just so powerful and I get such great messages from this deck. Now I do read this deck primarily based on the imagery. So I read it as if it is an intuitive deck. So one of the reasons that it took me so long to decide to go ahead and modify this deck is not because I didn't really want to. It's because I wasn't really sure how I wanted to go about it. So I've seen this deck trimmed a couple of different ways. I've seen it trimmed where you just take the sides off of it, makes it a little bit more narrow, a little bit easier to handle, and you still have the titles at the top and the keywords at the bottom. And whereas I think that does work really well, I think that for me, I'm going to trim it down completely to the artwork. And the reason I say that is because, for one, some of the keywords don't really resonate with me. Some of them are wonderful, and some of them just don't quite get it for me in the way that I read this book. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these keywords. They are great for the cards. They work really well for the artwork, but just in the way that I work with this deck, I don't necessarily use the keywords at all. I also don't use the titles. So as I said, I really do. For me, the charm, the power in this deck is in these really raw, really primal works of art. And I definitely read this more intuitively, letting the art itself bring forth the message. And I don't really pay attention to what the title is or what the keyword is. So I've decided that what I'm going to do is take this deck completely down to the artwork. And then I will have a much smaller deck to contend with, although it will still be glossy. I think it will be easier to handle because I did the same thing with my Star Tarot, which is also another shiffer deck, and it has the same type of glossy cardstock, the really thick cardstock. And that one, after having trimmed it and used it quite a bit, has really kind of softened up a little bit. So I'm hoping that the same will be true for the Tarot of the She, because I do absolutely love working with this deck. It's a very powerful deck for me, but it's not a deck that physically that I'm drawn to work with. It's not a wonderful tactile experience because of those cardstock issues. So I'm going to attempt to remedy that today by taking the borders completely off and just making it a beautiful art only, more intuitive tarot that will hopefully resonate more with the way that I work with this deck and in the way that I use it. So let's pop on over to my craft table and get started. Okay, so I have my deck, I have my trimmer, and I have my washi because I am, like always now, going to use measurements. So I'm basically going to repeat the process that I always do nowadays, and that is to basically trim off one side at a time. And like I mentioned, I am going to take this deck completely down borderless, just down to the artwork, because of the way I use this deck is kind of like a power activation and for meditation and path working. And, while I do use it for readings, I definitely read with it more intuitively in terms of just, laying down some cards and what do the pictures, tell me, what message am I getting from the artwork? And that really doesn't have anything to do with the title or the keyword on the card. So because that is kind of the way I've been working with this deck, I really don't feel that I really need those titles or the keywords in order to really make use of this deck. However, because I might change my mind, there's always a possibility I will change my mind once I start a modification. So in this particular instance, because I'm pretty sure, like 95% sure that I want to take it down to just the artwork. I have seen it trimmed where just people have left the tops and bottoms so that you retain those titles and those keywords. So basically what I'm going to do, because I already trimmed my deck in stages like this, I'm going to take off both the sides first and then take a look at the deck and see what I think before I decide whether or not I'm actually going to take off the title and the keywords. Because once I get it down just to the sides being gone, I might decide that that's enough for me and that, I like the way that works or the way that looks. And if I just go ahead and cut the whole deck without taking that moment to pause in between to see what I think about the process and how it's coming along, it'll be too late at that point. So because I know that there is a possibility that I might want to leave the title and keyword, I'm just going to start. I'm going to trim the entire right side of the deck first, then I'm going to trim the entire left side of the deck, and then I'm going to take a look and see what I think before I just start, chopping away at those top and bottom borders. So that is the process that I'm going to follow for this mod. I'm going to take a piece of washi and I'm going to line my card up. Now this particular deck does have an inside purple border, a very thin purple border inside that black border that encases the artwork. And I am going to cut that off because regardless of whether I decide to leave the titles or not, I don't want to have to try to contend with getting my line perfectly straight up against that very small purple border. So that is just gonna get cut off right from the get-go, and then I won't have to worry about that at all. So I think that I need to go just a tad. That's not gonna get it. And I do tend to like to use marks, although this one has very full rounded corners, so it's hard to get the corner right up against the mark there. Another handy reason to use the washi, if I could even get it to stick to the board. So I'm thinking that I'm going to be right about here. And I can't get it to lay straight. Should have picked a bigger piece of washi. That probably would have been helpful. And it's not terribly helpful that my all of the sticky is coming off my board from all the washi I stick on it and peel off and put on and all that. So anyway, I think that might be too far. I always like to cut more conservatively to start with, and then I can move in more. Yeah, that's not going to be far enough. I'm thinking right about here. I can always, move it over more and cut off more. I can't put back on more, so I'm having real issues with my washi here. Okay, behave washi, behave. Okay, I think that looks good. So we're going to try that. And see. I think that was good because I got it. I got all the purple border off and I took it down to the artwork on just that one side. So that works for me. So I am basically going to just keep repeating this process and just cutting off that one side to start with. So that I can get a much more precise cut. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this right side and then we will take a look and see how it looks. Okay, so I finished trimming the right edge of the deck, and I did want to note that I wasn't being quite as careful as I should have been because this is a super glossy card. It does, if you're not careful, it will slip around as you're putting pressure down against this coming down into the card, if you don't hold it down properly, the bottom of the card can shift. So what I found that was happening was that the top of the card was being cut at the right dimensions, but the bottom of the card, as the pressure was created as the blade was going through the card, it was creating pressure that was sliding the card slightly away from the blade. And then so what was happening was the bottom of my cut here was a little bit off. So when I went back and looked at my deck, and I went, this whole side of my deck was taller than this whole side of my deck. Now you can see there's still some imperfections. I've been trying to pull cards out and touch them up a little bit, but you do have to be careful because there is one particular card in here that I obviously didn't have quite right up against my washi tape, and it is a little bit shorter than others. So when I'm using it to line up, if I'm not careful, I'm using that one, and every card is taller than that one. Now I could go and trim every card to be the exact same height as that one. That's if you want a perfectly trimmed deck. That's what I recommend. Find whatever your shortest cut card is, and then go ahead and trim the rest of the deck to match. However, you do have to be careful when you do that, because the chances of you getting every card exactly perfect are pretty slim, and you can basically end up just whittling away this deck. So at some point you just have to kind of call it, that's good. It will straighten itself out a little bit more when I go to cut the other side, and that will allow me to fix, because I'm going to now use this side to line up with things. That will allow me a second chance to straighten out the sides of the deck. So you can see here that this is the slivers that I ended up cutting off. So it's basically just a sliver and then into the bottom of the deck. So I did want to just note that, because I wasn't paying quite as much attention as I should have been. And that's particularly an issue with thick cardstock and glossy cardstock, because thick cardstock is harder for your trimmer to get through. I mean, it goes through it just fine, but it is harder than, you know, some of the thinner cards. And that glossy means it may slip around a little bit. So to fix that, basically I had to go back and straighten it up a little bit. I could have just left it and that would have been just fine too, but you know me, I like for my deck to be even. The more even it is, the better it shuffles. Even though this deck doesn't rifle shuffle at all, so making it smaller means that hopefully I'll be able to overhand it a little bit better. So now that we've gone through all of that, now it's time to cut the other side, because like I said, I'm going to leave the tops and bottoms for now. As I only cut one side of the deck at a time anyway, there's no reason for me not to leave those and do the two sides first and see what I think. So I'm going to line that up there, line it up with my washi, and that looks to be about right. So now to combat this issue, basically what I'm doing is I'm pressing down firmly on the top and the bottom of the card. So I'm basically using my fingers up here and my thumb down here to press that card down and to hold it in place. And every finger everywhere. That sounded terrible, but basically what I mean is every point of contact that I can make with the card to hold it in place is going to help me get a straighter cut. So that came out pretty well. I did cut a little bit into the artwork, but I'm trying to get off that little purple strip of border there, so that works for me. And there is the card without the two borders. So I'm going to finish this up, and then we will take a look at the deck when I've got the two sides cut off. Okay, we're at the moment of truth time. I have finished trimming off the other side of the deck. I think it might have been this side. Anyway, both sides are gone now, and you can see that actually the deck does fit quite nicely in my hand now, which is a big improvement over what we had before. And now I'm just at the point of trying to decide for sure whether or not I want to lose the titles and the keywords. So one of the things that I've been considering is that, at least in the majors, so the top is just the numeral, the Roman numeral, and the bottom actually has the title of the card. So here we have the Chariot, and we just have the number 7 at the top. So for the majors, if I just took off the top, I could retain the bottom. I could even tighten it up a little bit just to get it a little bit closer to the edge, because that title is really close to that purple line. So I could totally do that, make a smaller deck. I would still be able to tune into those, the major arcana energies if I wanted to. However, I do know this deck quite well, and I don't know that I would need a title on it to know that that is my Chariot. But when it comes to my minors, so this one, for example, is the Maker Queen. So that's the Queen of Pentacles, which I absolutely love. And she's the Gift of Healing, which I think for this particular card is a lovely keyword. And here we see the Dreamer 3, so that is the 3 of Swords and the keyword of soul loss. So in this particular instance, that keyword for me is really limiting, because that's not how I read my 3 of Swords. And if I take the titles off, you know, I could probably guess what card that is, because there's a missing heart. It's a very soulful card. This particular one, I could probably guess that that's my Queen, because of the artwork. However, like I said, I know this deck so well, I don't even know that I need that. And then here we have Dreamer 2 with the Half Moon Truth. So that's an interesting one. So some of the titles or some of the keywords I do quite like. But there's a couple of them that I don't, and that I just end up completely ignoring. Here's one. The maker for the 4 of Pentacles is the Greedy Tree. That's hearkening back to that Waite Smith imagery that we see, and that's not how I read the 4 of Pentacles. So for me, that keyword really doesn't work quite well. So I think that regardless of the fact that you could totally take off probably the titles, you could actually do either or. If you took off just the bottom, the numbers in the Roman numerals would key you into the major arcana, and the tops would, if I could find a minor, the tops would tell you which card it was in the minor arcana. So depending on what you wanted to keep with, whether you wanted to keep the title of the card or the keyword, that would definitely, you know, you could definitely keep one or the other and still get this deck even, you know, a little bit more smaller, a little bit easier to manage. And you would still be able to know, like, the titles, you would still be able to know what card it is. So at this point, because that's more of what I would lean towards if I'm going to keep one or the other, I think what I'm going to do, because the keywords, although they're nice in some respects, I just find in some of the cards they're a little bit limiting. And some of them, like Web of Mirrors, that one I think works really well, but not all of them do for me. And that's just more about the way that I read tarot. That's not a comment on this deck. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the bottoms off now, and then take another look at it and see if with the bottoms gone, do I just want to leave those tops so that I do still have some sort of title to keep me into the energy, or do I just want to go ahead and go all in and make it more of an intuitive art deck? So that's the next step, is just to basically take these titles off. And I was having a little bit of the same issue with the card slippage on that second side, but I was being a bit more careful and I was catching it as it was happening. So it was a little bit easier to contend with the second time around. So just do my measurements here, my washi for my guideline. It's gonna sit right there. And that worked, and I'm going to take basically just the title off, a sliver of the artwork just because I need to get that purple line off. But that is what that's going to look like. So I'm going to finish those up, and then we will come back and take another look and see what we think. Now we are at the moment of truth, round 2. Okay, so I've taken the keywords off the bottom, and I gotta say, I don't mind it with just the titles on the top. Although I was planning on really using this more as an intuitive deck, if I leave the titles on, I can make sure that I have access to those tarot meanings and the tarot titles and energies if I want them. So I thought maybe let's just lay a few out here. I think they're kind of in order, but because I was doing something with them, even though I don't have I haven't rounded the corners or anything, but let's just see, what do I think? I feel like I'm getting a lot of warriors. I mean, a lot of fire. What do I think? What do you think? I don't know. You guys are probably all like yelling at the screen. Do this, do that. Okay, I don't mind it with the titles. But all this extra space above the titles, I'm not sure I love that. Because it just feels like it feels unbalanced to me, and that's kind of driving my OCD brain a little bit crazy. And I think that might have been one of the things that really did kind of bother me about these titles, is that the text is really close to the line, and then so you get all that extra space around, which makes it uneven within its little frame. So like if this were moved up a little bit and it was even within the black border, I think I would like that a little bit better. Maybe go ahead and take it down a little bit. I mean, once I do this though, I'm committed. I have to do it to all of the cards, or I have to just take all the titles off. So if I go to this mark right here, is that going to get me a little bit closer and see if it makes any bit of difference to me? That does look so much better though, doesn't it? Is it just me? Am I just totally ridiculous? Okay, let's do a couple. Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, the borders are unobtrusive now. The titles fit within the space a little bit better. It doesn't bother me near as much. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go ahead. What am I going to do? Maybe I need to think about it. Maybe I'll think about it for a minute and come back. Okay, I went, got a drink, actually took a little walk just to give myself a little bit of space, and because I've probably been sitting in this one spot for far too long anyway. And although I don't mind the titles, I'm thinking that I do still really want this to be a completely borderless, just down to the artwork deck, really similar to my Star Tarot, which I absolutely love. And I just, for one, I don't think that I really need the titles anymore because I am so familiar with this deck, but also because it's just kind of what I want it to be. It's kind of what I want it to look like. Although this, I think, is even just this is just a much better size. But I'm just kind of looking forward to having it down to just that artwork. But now here's the issue, because I've made these cards smaller than these cards, I'm going to have to cut these and then go back and reset measurements for these ones because now they're going to be a little bit different. But let's just go ahead and trim off this last title. We're going to go ahead and do it. You know, this is a mass market deck, so if I decide at some point that I don't like it or I want a second version with the titles on it, I can certainly order another one if need be, or maybe shipper will finally get on board with things and stop producing decks in this horrible thick glossy cardstock and produce decks in that newer cardstock that I know the Empathetic Oracle has. That would be fabulous. I'd love to see this deck reprinted in that. Or the, I think the new Mary L, although I don't have that one because I'm not fond of some of the changes that were made, although I would love to have a Mary L in a matte cardstock. The changes just don't really thrill me. Some of the cards were redone that I really liked the way they are before, and I'm just super attached to my, I'm just attached to my heavily modded version of the Mary L. So anyway, that little rant aside, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off. And now we have completely borderless down to the artwork. And I think that is just gonna be really, really powerful when the whole deck is done like that. Because although I don't mind, like I said a million times, I don't mind the titles, but this to me is a power deck, and taking it down just to that powerful artwork I think is going to be really interesting. So I need to keep these ones separate because they're separate size, different size. Anyway, so I'm really looking forward to doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this deck in terms of trimming it. I'm going to go ahead and corner around it, and then we'll come back, take a look, and talk about the colors that I'm going to be edging it in. Okay, so I have been working away on this deck, and I actually have 3 piles. So I have a pile of cards that I haven't finished yet, a pile of cards that I have edged in the purple. It's just the Crayola purple, which I really don't mind. I'll go ahead and bring those in so you can see them. And actually, I mean, it works really well because there's purple on the back and it does match. But it was a little light for my taste, a little vibrant. I wanted something a little bit darker. So what I did is I actually just rubbed on some distressed oxide ink in the black suit. So that just kind of added in some black texturing in there, and it kind of helped to tone the purple down a little bit. And it also, you know, kind of made it blend a little bit better with the back, which I think looks a lot better than it did with just the purple. So let's line them all up here so we can see. Now see, when I put it next to the purple, you can really tell the difference. And then here is the unfinished, the first stage of the purple, and then the overlay with the black suit. So I think that looks a lot better. Even though I wasn't really keen to do this deck in purple from the get-go, I actually do think that by adding the black and letting it have that texture to it, so it's a little bit of the distressed purple look kind of, I think that actually works quite well. So I thought I'd just pop on real quick and show you how I did that. I do have a whole video on how I use this technique, but since we're doing it on this deck, I thought I'd just show you real quick. So basically what I'm doing is, you know, edging a section of the cards in the purple, and then I'm coming back in here and I'm taking a small grouping of the cards. So about like that. And I would not recommend this with edging in general, but for just to overlay it, it actually works quite well. And because this is black and I like really don't want to just completely blacken my finger, you can see it's already getting on my hand. And I've been laying this down to help protect my table, but I've just been using a paper towel here and using it to dab the ink on. And it's just saving a little bit of wear and tear on my fingers. So I'm pressing the cards together pretty firmly, and then I'm just basically rubbing it on. I like my corners to be a bit darker, so I'm adding a bit more there. Again, pressing down, and this is why I do just a small grouping at a time, because I got to be able to press them together. And as you'll see here in a minute, I have to actually wipe these off fairly quickly because I don't want to leave any of that residue on the fronts or backs of the cards. And you can see I'm still getting it on my other hand, but that's okay. So I rub that on like that. And then I just take, and it's on my fingers now, of course. I just take my paper towel and I go around the fronts as I normally do with any sort of edging, just to make sure that I'm getting off anything that might have run over onto the front or back. Should be doing them the other way so you can actually see the cards. And that's pretty much the process, just to give it that overlay, that distressed look. And then I kind of stack them up and let them just hang out for a little bit and dry, because the distressed ink does take a little bit longer to dry than the Crayolas. So I'm going to basically finish up this deck, and then we'll come back and take a look at the finished product. Alright, so I have finished my modification of the Tarot of the Sidhe, and basically I have turned this into a pocket deck. So here's how the backs turned out. I did end up cropping a little bit off the top and a little bit off each side, but I think it still works fine. I wish I could have got it full, but you can still see the whole spiral here, which I do really like. The edges ended up, I think, looking really good. I actually do really like it. It's that purple that I darkened with the distress ink overlay, and I think it looks really cool. So I've taken, of course, the borders completely off of this deck, and these images are super powerful anyway, and I mean, look at that. I love this deck. I love the way that it turned out. Borderless, but I do have to say, so I've actually done a couple of readings in between finishing up the deck mod and coming to this point, and I do have to say that without the borders, the images feel even more powerful. Try to explain it as best I can, but basically this deck, without the images, or without the borders, the deck has a lot of energy. So without those borders, that energy is just it's kind of explosive, which I don't actually mind, because the way I tend to read with this deck is really not a whole bunch of images at once, because for me this is a very powerful deck. So I don't even tend to do 3 cards, but 3 would be the most that I would do with this deck in general. But usually what I do with this particular deck is I use 1 card, I pull 1 card, and then that card is my focus card. That provides the energy, the essence, the power of my reading. And then, just because, you know, even though this is a mod video, we can still talk about how I use decks, right? So then what I like to do actually is I pull in another tarot deck, sometimes an oracle, but usually another tarot. And my favorite tarot to pull in with my Tarot of the Sidhe is actually my Tarot of the Trees, which I totally need to edge. I don't know why I haven't done that yet. But how I basically read with this is I pull a card on either side. And this in general is how I work with this deck. So having the cards be borderless and now just down to that really powerful artwork, and it creates this nice aesthetic look as well, because this is a pocket deck. It's a small deck anyway, and when the Tarot of the Sidhe was really, really large, that black border was creating space between the 2 images, but it was distancing itself from the 2 images, if that makes sense. So now that I've taken the borders off it, I feel like the energy between all of these cards is actually flowing now, whereas before I feel like the big black borders were suffocating that energy. And again, this is totally just my preference. This is just how I work with this deck. Somebody else might have a totally different experience with this deck, and that's one of the things I love about tarot, right? We all have our own experiences with them. And for me, this is how I work with this deck. My center card, my Tarot of the Sidhe, is my message from the Sidhe. It provides the energy and the power behind my reading and my message. And then I use another deck to really pull out the details of that message. Sometimes, you know, I use just the 3 cards. Sometimes I will do, if I can even have enough room here, which I probably don't. So just put that up there. But sometimes I do a 7-card reading where I have the 6 cards around it to provide my message. I have what's leaving, what I'm heading into, what's in the conscious mind, and what's going on underneath. And then again, that image provides the energy, the main message of the reading, the power of the reading, and then the surrounding cards provide the details of that message. So that's just how I work with this deck. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make it borderless is so that I could work with those together in a way that works really well for me. But I think, I think either way, it's even just to use it in a basic reading works as well. It's just, there's a lot of power and a lot of energy in this deck. And this is a lot of energy for me. That's the reason I like to kind of let the one card be the main focus. And for me, that works really well for this particular deck. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to make it borderless, and why I really didn't mind so much about the losing the titles, because I don't use it for standard for standard reading. It provides, this is the anchor for my reading. This is the power. This is where all the energy comes from. And then the surrounding cards give me the details of the message. So this deck really doesn't, it doesn't riffle shuffle really any better than it did before. It's that thick, glossy cardstock that just doesn't want to really have any give to it, and it sticks when you try to push it back together. So shuffling didn't really change much any that way, but now I can actually overhand it and actually get a good shuffle that way, whereas before it was kind of a pain to shuffle because of the size of the deck. But anyway, I'm actually really pleased with how this came out, because this being this size now and just allowing that one central card be the center, and then pulling in my other decks like I do with, my little Tarot of the Trees here. It's just it's working so much better for me now this way. And taking those borders off really just released that energy in the cards so that they were able to really, explode out of the card. But that does mean that trying to do too many cards, it's a little bit overwhelming with this particular deck because there is so much power to it. So anyway, so that is my modification of the Tarot of the She. I hope you enjoyed this mod with me, and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.